Welcome to another episode of Touring the AFC South. I am your host, Mike Patton. And on this episode, my guest is a freelance multimedia personality who specializes in fantasy sports and is a frequent podcaster on the TBQ Sports Network, I would say. Correct?
Yep.
All right. Of course, he has expensive knowledge on the NFL and NBA as well. I would like to welcome Mr. Nick Wilcox to the show. First time coming through. How you doing, man?
Oh, feeling great, man. Feels great to even be on episode 200 here. I feel honored and I feel very blessed to be here. So thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Like Nick mentioned, this is episode 200. And now we're going to get into some fantasy football questions and things like that, along with getting to know Nick as well. But before we get there, like Nick mentioned, this is episode 200, and that's where we're going to start the Get Off Your Chest segment. Now, I didn't realize this until I was sitting down and, realized I got to the 200th episode. But I did 200 episodes in maybe a little less than 11 months, or a little over 11 months, I should say. The 100th episode for this show was September 21st, 2022. The 200th episode tonight is a whole month ahead of that, which is insane to me. I did not realize that I was doing shows like that. But hey,
that's what happens when you hustle.
Right. I just want to thank everyone that's actually, shared the podcast, came on the podcast, whoever poured into me, things like that, because not many podcasts make it to 200 episodes. Not many people stay around long enough to make it to 200 episodes and stay motivated to make it to 200 episodes. So as much as I instill confidence or talk, different things and sound like I have it all together, some days I do not. And some days those words of encouragement and saying, hey, you're doing a great job and things like that, they go a long way, more than some of you actually really, really know. And I just want to take the time to thank everyone that supported me, shared the podcast, been on the podcast, promoted it, bought some merch, whoever. I just want to thank all of you from the bottom of my heart. A lot of you mean a lot more to me than you ever really will know. And I just want to thank everyone. That's what I had to get off my chest on the Get Off Your Chest segment for this episode. I mean, Nick, I don't know if you want to add anything, but, I just had to get that off my chest and thank the people that have supported me through this entire journey.
I think that's awesome. I think what I'll add is the whole running back situation in the NFL is a whole drama. We have, especially with the Jonathan Taylor thing, it's crazy. He's going to be on a PUP list, can't play for 4 weeks now. And they're not looking to trade him. And with all the other running backs, they just gave up. They just caved in. We just got to take this money and that's it. Barkley, then Jacobs got an extra $2 million on top of his franchise tag deal. It's unfortunate that the running backs today, are just being bamboozled here when it comes to some of these owners. And unfortunately, the system, if people have not seen it and recognized it, this has been the system for quite some time, where they draft it's like getting a very, very expensive young car, right? Drive it off the lot. We go coast to coast. We go do this, whatever. But as soon as maintenance comes for it, we got to get rid of it.
Right.
So that's what, in a sense, that's what the NFL has been doing with the running back position. And since because running back position doesn't lead necessarily to you having a big impact to winning, the Super Bowl overall due to the numbers. Since 1997, there's only been one rushing title running back that has actually, gone to the Super Bowl and won it, and that was Terrell Davis when the Broncos in the late 90s went back-to-back. But other than that, the running back position has not really been, geared towards you winning a Super Bowl overall, because now we're in more pass-happy league than ever before, and it's a QB receiver-centric league now. So with the running back position, it shouldn't be getting grossly underpaid like this based on position by position. But I think the franchise tag combined with the running back position not being so of age, by age 28, 29, even by 30, in most cases, you're looking at your last contract overall. So that's where, again, like there's so many flaws in the system right now with the running back position that anyone that's playing running back right now is unfortunately getting drafted. And until they fix that issue, it's unfortunately a really annoying thing that we have to see and deal with. You see these players busting their butts, and then they're high risk for injury, and they know once they get hurt, their likelihood of getting an awesome, massive deal died when Todd Gurley's and Le'Veon Bell's of the world 5-6 years ago got these bigger contracts, and now it's like, oh well, we're not going to give you this money. Why not? Well, because look what happened, in the history of your position so far. You get hurt, and then all of a sudden, we can't pay you this amount of money. So it's gone to other positions besides the running back, which is, in a sense, unfair because we feature the running backs in a sense still, but not like we used to. Now it's more committee backs, and now all these teams can save money. So unfortunately, if I was running back in the NFL right now at a high level, I'd be pissed.
Yeah, totally understand that one. Yeah, I went in a couple weeks ago about that, and it just literally it just frustrates me that no one wants to pay the running backs, and then they can't all get on the same page because somebody's going to cave at one point, and it just so happened that Saquon Barkley was the first one to do so. So it is what it is, unfortunately. And like the circle of life, eventually something will change, but it won't change during the time of these running backs, more than likely. I want to also shout out Corey Jackson. He did say, congratulations, my brother, which Corey has been one of my main supporters. That has been my boy back like almost 2 decades now. So yeah, I gotta say thank you for all the support. Definitely thank you, man, for that. Now, of course, we got to get on to the show, to the meat of the show, which I brought you on, talk a little fantasy football. But before we do that, I just want to kind of get everyone to get to know you. So I got to ask, how did you kind of find your way into getting into sports in general?
Well, it's a very interesting story. Somewhat painful too, though. So in general, I mean, I played football when I was younger. But how I really got into being like, a big fan of football was I'm a Jets fan. And there was a point in time, I think it was the year 2000, in which, so it was just a random, we're just flipping through the channels, whatever. And it was Chad Morin that returned like a kick return for a touchdown, like early on that 2000 year, whatever have you. And since then, it was like, this looks kind of fun. Hey, I want to go out and do that. And then I started going out and do that. And then I started playing running back. Curtis Martin was my idol. Want to be just like him. Want to be as durable as him too. But overall, I fell in love with eventually him, LaDainian Tomlinson. And then the list goes on from there. Ideally, didn't make it to playing college football. Actually started playing rugby in college instead of football, which is ironic as well. But yeah, I mean, I became a Jets fan after that whole thing that happened with Chad Morton, and I just started watching Curtis Martin tape, and that's where it kind of took off from there. The Chad Penningtons and stuff, and the butt fumble Mark Sanchez's, to the last year with Zach Wilson, who was terrible. But now Aaron Rodgers, so we'll see what happens. That's overall how I got into football. That's that.
All right. Now, of course, you did mention your favorite football team is the Jets. Now, it came about from, you said Chad Morton?
Yeah.
You said?
Yeah.
So that's how it came about to be your favorite team. Wow.
Yeah,
That's
I know.
Interesting.
Yeah, green. Favorite color is green too, so that kind of played a role into it as well. But a little random, but very interesting as well.
Okay. All right. So, we're going to go from football to fantasy football. Now, you mentioned, like was mentioned at the beginning of the show, you're very well versed in the fantasy football world. So how did you kind of gain all that knowledge or get involved in the fantasy football world?
Well, so I gotta go back to like junior year of high school. So that's 2007. So I was doing, look, this started by literally just being bored at my computer screen when the teacher was just yomping, and I'm just like, what is this? So fantasy sports overall during that time was still starting to get into a digitalized um, era in which you had some Yahoo Sports and NFL.com's ESPN and stuff like that. They were just starting to kind of roll those things out. So I was bored. When I was bored, I would just join fantasy football leagues, fantasy baseball leagues, basketball leagues, just publicly, randomly, whatever. And just started to get more knowledge about it. Until eventually, some of my friends, we started up our league for fantasy football a couple years later. And then they got tired of me whooping up on them, and then we dispersed the league, and then we got it back together eventually with some of my other closer high school friends, and we've continued that tradition since then. How I got into more of the just more deeper into the fantasy realm and knowing not only about the strategy of fantasy football and other sports, because I do fantasy basketball too, learned more about it by just diving more into it, asking more questions, connecting on social media platforms, and eventually just getting a really good knowledge of that. And that translated into also what they call daily fantasy sports, so DFS. So I also play that as well. Where you make your own lineup based on a salary cap, and then you can make money doing that or whatever. So I do that as well when it's a football, basketball season, because it's a cool hobby to do, but also you can win money, but you can also just meet cool people while doing it. So that's where it all really started and came about, just really being bored in high school, and just doing random public free leagues with people I really didn't know or whatever, but also just learning the strategies and how to really go hero RB, go zero RB, go don't pick a quarterback in the first 2 rounds like back then, or because everybody else was doing it. Wait for a QB later on. That's how I won some of my leagues back then, was just late round QB. Like while everybody's grabbing the McNabbs or whatever, it's like I'm just gonna go and grab the latest guy like Lamar Jackson. All of a sudden, like he burst onto the scene. So that's just kind of how that story started to. That's the origin of that story overall.
Okay. All right. So we're going to get into your fantasy football knowledge and kind of, I'm going to throw a few questions at you. But first, of course, we got to pay these bills. That's a quick commercial break on Touring the AFC South with your host, Mike Patton.
A shift. A shift is something that happens and changes the dynamics. And that's what happened when Garrett Logistics was born. After 10 years as a sales pro in the logistics world of sporting goods, John Garrett decided to pivot to the world of freight and start a brokerage. So you're saying to yourself, why trust Garrett Logistics? Well, Garrett Logistics helps shippers improve overall workflow, along with increased on-time pickup and delivery percentages. Last-minute loads, multi-drop pickups, and more are part of the services with Garrett Logistics. They're available Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. to 6 p.m., and Saturday, 8 a.m. to 12 p.m., all times Central Standard Time. So give them a ring at 615-400-8484. That's 615-400-8484, or you can email them at john@garrettlogistics.co or visit their website at garrettlogistics.co. Garrett Logistics, where the motto is, it's not just freight to us, it's your business.
All right, and we are back. And like I mentioned before the commercial break, we are going to get some fantasy football questions to Nick. And here's where we're going to start. Now, of course, I am trying to help some people out there that may be having some fantasy football questions for you. So
I'm here for it.
I want to ask you, do you believe a mobile QB is more valuable in fantasy football than a pocket quarterback?
Oh, yeah. I mean, since, this really has been something that you should have been prioritizing for the last 5 years, 6 years. The reason for that is because, back in 2014, a guy named Rich Rebar came out with what they call the Konami code. And what that is basically targeting QBs that were rushing, that had rushing, like mega upside rushing, but not so much like the greatest of pocket passers. And obviously we've seen that transition in the last NFL over the last, decade anyway. Some people, obviously, there's people out there that have been against that for whatever reason because they want their quarterbacks to stay in the pocket and be a traditional quarterback. Like, dude, get over it. It's 2020, whatever now. Now it's 2023. So with the rushing quarterbacks in mobile, it's vital. to have one of those for your rosters. Just in terms of, I had a stat overall that I'll read off later when it comes to that. And it pertains to a certain quarterback in the AFC South that I have to keep close to the vest at the moment. But with mobile QBs in general, you want one of those because although you want a pocket passer in particular, most settings, especially in today's fantasy football realm, you want a guy that's going to have a rushing floor / ceiling, and a guy that can still throw the ball pretty decently. Even if you necessarily don't have a guy that's going to pocket pass really well, the rushing upside is going to produce a lot more points for you on a per game basis than you are throwing the ball for 300 plus yards passing and 3 touchdowns, whatever. Most formats now, especially if I always tell people, check your scoring settings before you draft, before you join a league. So that way you're very comfortable to finding out what nuances you can take advantage of. So for instance, if you're playing in a league that only rewards 4 points per passing touchdown, clearly a disadvantage, because now with a pocket passer, you're not gonna want to initially grab a QB so early unless they have a rushing upside. So the difference between a Hurts and a Burrow is that Hurts is going to give you an amazing rushing floor and rushing ceiling, combined with that awesome passing through the air. That's why he goes, more towards your 3rd round in most cases right now, versus Burrow, who probably goes late 4th round, because he doesn't give you as much rushing upside. And in a league where that's only going to reward you 4 passing points per touchdown, doesn't necessarily, you should value Hurts more than Burrow. Obviously, Burrow will still give you a nice ceiling and whatnot, but he won't give you that rushing floor. So it's still very vital to have a mobile QB at the position. The only reason why I tell you to maybe not prioritize that so much is if you know that, okay, so for instance, I'll give you a great example of this year. So right now, we have elite QBs in Hurts, Mahomes, then Allen, right? After those 3 guys, it becomes you kind of pick your QB depending on how the rest of your league mates are picking. So I'm going to look, the next tier I have is Lamar, Fields, Burrow. All those guys in the same tier. Then I would have T-Law, Herbert after. The reason why I would have Lamar, Fields, and Burrow in the same tier is because I believe, like I talked about with Burrow, gives you a great ceiling still, even though he's a pocket passer. Because he's still in a hybrid offense that's going to be a top 3 in the league in most cases. But Lamar and Fields are sitting in the same tier, and probably I'd pick them over Burrow in a bag, is because of their rushing floors / their rushing ceilings. Fields rushed for over 1,000 yards rushing as a quarterback, and that's part of, again, what I talked about in the beginning of this conversation about the Konami code, where you have a guy that's going to be rushing constantly and going to be rewarded for those touchdowns, especially when you get in your goal line. He plunges into the end zone, QB sneaks, or he goes for a long rushing touchdown with the QB. So in these situations, this is why the mobile QB, not only for an NFL perspective, but certainly for your fantasy footballs, drafts and leagues, you need to definitely at least want to have one of them. And like I talked about before, the only scenario I would probably tell people that probably it's not as so important is that if you know that if QBs go later in your drafts and on average, then okay. You're okay with not grabbing an elite QB based on roster construction. And then from there, I will go and grab a guy like Jared Goff later. Maybe a guy like Geno Smith later, who I know, in particular Jared Goff. The reason why I say Jared Goff is because he's going to play the back half of his schedule. He plays in the last 7 to 8 games into your fantasy football playoffs. He's going to play in a dome 7 out of those 8 games. So for Goff, he's very good in a dome. So that's already a solid floor with potential good ceiling, because he's going to have Jameson Williams back by then. He's going to have Amon-Ra St. Brown to throw to, Sam Laporta if he develops really well as a rookie. So there's certain guys still you can still take later on that's pocket passers. And that helps you out in this situation, because you're able to now, all right, if I can set up my roster strategically with a lot of depth at running back and receiver and a decent tight end, then I can wait for QB later on after I get that solid depth. And depending on how many league mates you have, that strategy usually works well for a 12 team. For a 10 team, probably talking about a guy that you do want to elite QB early. You do want to elite tight end early, because those positions are 1Z positions where you get one of those guys and you already have an elite, floor and ceiling, you're good, and then the rest you can focus on later on. What we talk about based on mobile QB, pocket passer, is going to depend on roster construction, but it's also going to depend on, all right, like this is what I want to do, and this is what it's shaping out to be, and it's also kind of reading your room and finding out, okay, this strategy is going to go really well because this is how I've set it up so far. So the first 2 picks, running back, receiver, cool. All right, do I go elite QB if I'm picking at the beginning of the 3rd round so I could just solidify my roster even more, or do I wait because I'm at the end of the 3rd round going into the 4th, and maybe Lamar might fall to the 4th round, and I could take him then before, doing the rest of my roster construction. So it's going to depend on a few of those things. It's going to vary depending on the room you're in.
Okay. All right. Another question I have for you: dual threat running backs. Dual threat running backs like Austin Eckler are the kind of the right frequency for some fantasy football players, but running backs like Derrick Henry are, too. So what you think would be what would you think is kind of the right frequency in terms of a running back that you pick, and why?
So the frequency of that is going to really depend on, so for this year, I would say it doesn't matter so much. What does matter, that will depend on PPR. Some people, for whatever reason, still play standard. If you do, tell your league manager, commissioner to tell you guys to start playing points per reception. But if that would depend on the format. However, to answer your question, I do want a dual threat running back. Although, like I said, that scenario kind of changes. So, for example, they say Bijan Robinson doesn't, catch as many passes or whatever, or at least not projected to get as many of those. But he's still a guy that people are going to clamor towards because of the Atlanta last year running the ball at a 51% run rate. So it's going to depend on scenarios. With Austin Eckler, same thing. People are going to poke holes with the new Chargers offense, and Kellen Moore being there is going to go more vertical, but he's still going to have opportunities to be a goal line back and going to be the all-purpose back. So it is going to depend on somewhat the scoring format. To answer your question, I do want a dual threat running back that can run and catch because that's the era of football that we're in now. But I'm not going to shy away from taking Derrick Henry or Nick Chubb or anything that matter, especially if they fall. And because of the certain scoring setting, if they fall down even the board even more, I definitely won't shy away from taking one of them. What I tell people is that you should just be comfortable with based on your tiers of who you have at certain positions. So, for example, let's say you're playing full point per reception, so that's 1 point per catch. Now, obviously, running backs that are dual threats are going to be valued a bit higher, but ideally, that doesn't mean you cast out guys like Henry and Chubb, like I talked about. You still want to get those guys at relatively decent, part of the draft. So in a setting like full point PPR, I do see sometimes Henry and Chubb going at the 2-3 turn. And for Chubb, I know he goes a little bit more higher. For Henry, I do see him at 2-3 turn. And I do want to take Henry where it's appropriate because I still think that Henry, although, has a big touch mileage, he doesn't catch the ball as much. However, he's still a guy that can, if anyone's going to beat statistics and everything that's, it's got an outlier year, it's still going to be Henry. And if I could get him as an RB2, especially after, let's just say you're picking at the top of the draft and 2-3 turn, Henry is there. If I can grab another running back and him as my RB2, you're looking really good. So to answer your question, like I said, dual threat running backs is obviously the era that we're in. But guys like Chubb, guys like Henry, guys that are still more bruiser backs, they still have value, depending on your roster construction as well. Guys like Brian Robinson, same thing. People like Brian Robinson over Gibson or Gibson over Robinson. And in full point PPR, I'm still somewhat valuing that situation the same because Brian Robinson to me is still a talented back that if he gets 20 touches, 20 carries, maybe catch 1 or 2 passes, that's still great. Even if he doesn't catch any passes, that's still going to give you value on your roster, depending on where he's going. Because Brian Robinson, on occasion, will probably be your RB4, your 4th running back on your team. So, in regards to that, it's got to be I tell people, fantasy football is you got to be like water. You got to be able to adjust. You got to be able to flow. You got to be all right, this is the room I'm in right now. Okay, this is where you got to be able to identify what your other league mates are trying to do, so that way you could counter them and be like, all right, cool. Like, well, if you're gonna go and get a bunch of running backs, I'm gonna get a bunch of receivers. All right, like, and we'll see how that goes. But this is part of the psychology of the fantasy football game is definitely the room you're in, and also pinpointing your guys that you want to take, and also pinpointing where other people might perceive a certain guy. And also the second part of that is risk management, where it's like, okay, like I don't want to get for example, Keelan Allen. Last year, if you drafted Keelan Allen, you were pissed because you probably drafted him to be probably your second receiver around 3. He ends up getting hurt. He's missing like 8 games, whatever have you. Second half of the year, he comes out and rips people. Overall, in second half of the year, does really well. But for the owner that drafted him, probably traded him off for a piece or two, or just to help their roster in the now. But then again, they're probably pissed later because they see him doing 20 points per game, stuff like that down the stretch. It's just part. This is all part of the game.
Right. And one last question I have for you. Does the style of offense kind of pull you from picking talented players in terms of receivers? Kind of, for example, like you got a DeAndre Hopkins is going to be in the Titans offense that's run oriented. Does that kind of deter you from picking him, or do you pick a guy that's like Calvin Ridley that's going to be in the Jacksonville offense and a lot of more likely throwing the football? Does that kind of change your thinking in terms of what wide receiver you'd pick?
Yeah, I mean, look, so when it comes to fantasy football, all we care about is points. All we care about is our guys staying healthy and scoring a lot of points. So if it comes down to these certain tiebreakers, I do try to go with the team that I feel is projected to be the better offense on a per-game basis throughout the year. That doesn't mean I would shy away from guys like Hopkins. It's more of a different – when you talk about both of those guys, and based on your example, Ridley's easily the guy I want, but Ridley's easily now creeping up to like that late second round where I'm like, the cost to acquire him is becoming a bit too much. So that's where, again, like sometimes in these offenses, when we're trying to target guys that are going to be in offenses that we think are going to be top 10, top 8 in the league, we want to target possibly a teammate later on. So in a scenario like this, maybe I would not draft either of those guys and grab Christian Kirk later on, who I know is going a few rounds later, and I still have, some equity in the Jags offense. That's still going to be a high-powered offense, at least projected-wise. So these scenarios, yes, like that's a perfect example of thinking about, okay, like, do I want to grab a guy at they're already getting drafted, like probably towards their ceiling? Maybe Ridley, like I said, he was probably 3rd round when we started the offseason. Now he's, like I said, like late 2nd round. I see guys grabbing him. There's a thing called FFPC, where it's like all the pros draft, and he's going pick 20 overall, pick 21. And it's like it's just too much for my blood pressure right there. Ideally Ridley could still finish in the top 5, and that still could be a value. But the likelihood and the risk management that I talked about earlier is, what if everything doesn't align 100% to the T? Let's just say for the first 4 weeks, Kirk is out beating Ridley. Now all of a sudden people are panicking, people are this, that, and the third, and now your investment on Ridley, you're getting queasy about, because the guy that's being drafted 3 rounds later in Kirk is out producing the guy you drafted late in the second. So it's some of these games you got to be talking about in your head and going over and be like, okay, like sometimes what's likely to happen, what's likely that this offense is not going to be this, and sometimes you're making bets on certain things that you're looking to be right on, and that's particularly when it comes to your player takes. So it's like being right about a certain situation, a certain player, certain situation, like just in general being right about it. So sometimes it's about that, but fantasy football, once again, is one of those games where it's like you could think you get everything right, and then all of a sudden it goes crashing down.
That's definitely right. Now, thank you for kind of, giving everyone kind of a little bit more insight into fantasy football, because, definitely a lot of people don't know those different intricacies of the game. But we're going to get down to the steals of fantasy football. But of course, first, we do have to pay a few bills. One more commercial break on Touring the AFC South with your host, Mike Patton.
You ever missed your mom's home-cooked meals? Well, You're not always able to get to those, but you are able to get to H&T's Home Cooking. Established in 2005, Patty Palin and her staff go out 6 days a week to create some of the best homestyle meals you can taste and at a fair price. So if you're in Nashville and you like some chicken and dressings, green beans, macaroni and cheese, and other things, stop by H&T's Home Cooking. The address is 2264 Murfreesboro Pike, Nashville, Tennessee 37217. And they are open Monday through Thursday and Sunday 11 to 6:30 and Friday 11 to 7. And if you want to order online, of course, the option is available as well at hthomecooking.com, or you can call 615-367-0049. H&T's Home Cooking, food for your soul.
All right, and we are back. And, a lot of fantasy football drafts are probably already happened, but of course, there's still some steals, I should say. It's a tongue twister right there. But there's still some steals available, as well as, some hidden gems that some people have gotten. So I kind of want to dive into those with you. I'm kind of going to mention one that I think is one. And, if you come up with one that, may be better, hey, it's all what you want to think and what you want to say. Are you cool with that?
I'm here for the people, Mike. Let's get it.
All right. Here we go. Now, a steal for me is Alan Lazard. I actually saw him. He's not necessarily a highly touted wide receiver by a lot of people in the draft, but people are like forgetting he's on the Jets, which is funny to me. It's funny to me, but
funny you mentioned a Jets player.
right. He had 60 receptions, 788 yards, 6 touchdowns last year. Of course, on that team this year with more weapons, but also he has a better rapport with Aaron Rodgers than probably any of the players that's outside of Randall Cobb, because Randall Cobb's been with him forever. So, to me, that kind of sets him up for, potentially getting more touchdowns and, getting those key receptions, in my opinion. So that's why I kind of say he's more than likely a steal. You can get him in the lower rounds, and you can also get a lot of value out of him just because of familiarity and because of the dependability as well.
I like that. I did tell Alan Lazard earlier in the offseason when it still wasn't popular, and it's still not popular. But I think it makes logical sense, especially because of Corey Davis recently retiring this past week. Now Lazard is even more and more solidified as the wide receiver 2 in this roster. The only thing I would say about that is to be cautious of is the Jets' play style may not be as high tempo as some other ones. But Lazard is definitely a guy that we could easily see as a guy that you slot into your flex later on in the year. And I talked about it earlier. If we think the Jets roster is going to be, decent in general, there's such a big discrepancy mark between Garrett Wilson, where he's being drafted, and Lazard. Lazard is being drafted as like the late wide receiver 40s, and Wilson's being drafted in like the top 10, top 12. The disparity between those two is obviously pretty wild. But in particular, like I like the Lazard take for sure. My guy, I would say, that I've been pounding the drum on for quite some time now. It's a rookie, and this receiver in particular won the best receiver reward in college last season. I'm talking about Jordan Addison of the Vikings, and why he's a steal is because depending on where you're drafting, whether Yahoo, NFL, ESPN, whatever, he's getting ranked as like pick number 90 overall, which is absolutely ridiculous. So the reason why I say it's ridiculous is because the Vikings in particular are a high-powered offense that's going to throw the ball a ton at a fast pace. With Addison, he slots right into the role where Adam Thielen was. Him and Jefferson were 2 of the 5 receivers that saw 600 overall targets, like as a team overall. There were 2 of the 5 receivers overall. Addison slots right into where Thielen left off. And Addison's not only younger, but I would say clearly a better talent at this stage of the game. And you're getting him, like, I would say the easiest round I've gotten in right now is like the early 6, where he should be going. See him drop to the 7th round sometimes. It's kind of ridiculous. But you want to be keen in on guys that will give you an upside later on. I like targeting receivers that are either rookies or second-year receivers, third-year receivers, because all those guys, especially wide receiver 3, year 3 receivers, because they ultimately used to be the point where receivers break out. But in the last couple of years, we see rookies and second-year wide receivers really break the mold and break out of nowhere. You want as many possible outcomes to that situation happening because that's going to help you out for the second half of the year. So with Addison in particular, just love where he gets slotted into, where he's going to be getting, he's going to have the one-on-one matchups. Jefferson was the most doubled receiver last year, hence the reason why he let you down in the semifinals last year against the Packers. How I know is because I had him on one of my teams. And thankfully I still won the championship, so that was good. But in particular, the Addison, getting drafted as potentially being that wide receiver 2 down the stretch is going to really help you out for, like I said, the fantasy playoffs. But in particular, he's going way too low and going after certain guys that doesn't make any sense.
Okay. All right. I'm going to throw another one at you, and this is a tight end position.
Yeah.
Darren Waller. Darren Waller is one that people kind of forget, and then they also think about he's playing with Daniel Jones. So those are the two things that I get with him a lot, and I've noticed. But the thing is, with Daniel Jones, he doesn't really have a ton of weapons at the wide receiver position. And Waller and a tight end can be your best friend. Because you have Saquon Barkley, who's basically was doing everything in the passing game and the running game. You throw another weapon out there and you put them in combination routes, here we go. You have Darren Waller that can get open, make some things happen. And I think he could be a sleeper getting in the end zone as well for them. So that's why I kind of selected for the sleeper at the tight end position.
Yeah. So with Darren Waller, you're spot on with that, but also the industry is definitely getting spot on with that as well. Everyone's seeing first of all, the rumblings of this started with Daniel Jones just constantly peppering Waller with targets to the point they had to take Waller off the field so Daniel Jones could throw to other people. That was one thing. Obviously, the Giants receiver situation is a mess in general, to the point that they signed Jamison Crowder and Cole Beasley as more slot receivers for this roster, which to me doesn't make any sense. But in terms of Waller, the only gripe I've had about Waller through the last couple of years, he just can't stay healthy. That's only gripe. I love the talent. The problem with Waller is, right now, he's starting to go up boards. He's starting to get to a point where I'm like, I'm going to take a pause on because the soft tissue injuries, of history overall with him is definitely relevant. And I think the change of scenery is going to be great news for him. And I'm definitely willing to take Waller where he was going, because he was going in drafts at tight ends. It was literally Kelsey, it was Andrews, it was then Hawkinson, Kittle, Goddard, Pitts, and then it was Waller. That's pretty much switched up to Waller now going as the tight end 4 or 5 going off most people's boards. And that's kind of a point where I'm like, well, depending on the other positions and what I got going on, I'm willing to still take somebody else before I grab Waller because I know someone's going to look to reach up to get him, which is okay. And I believe in the talent. I believe in the situation. It's just more of that when the soft tissue injuries for his overall history does ring a bell in my mind every time I think about that. Like I said, I like the price where he was before because he was going after certain guys. But now he's getting to a point where people are pushing him up the board, and you're like, well, I got a decision to make. Do I want to grab a guy like Waller, who I feel is definitely going to be a number one, be in a number one situation? But ideally, he does have that injury risk and that injury, history going on with him. Then it just depends on who else is going to be on the board. I do like your thinking behind it, though. I do want Waller in the right situations. It's just more of I'm still willing, tight end in particular, I'm still willing to wait for guys that are later on going on the draft that are still going to have some upside. I still like the range where the tight ends for me stop is David Njoku and Pat Freiermuth. After that range, it becomes a little bit touchy because I won't touch that position until probably later on where you're getting the rookie tight ends like Dalton Kincaid, Sam Laporta, those guys, because I think this is the year with tight end that a rookie tight end finally does pretty decent overall. So the last couple of years, it's been like, the rookie tight ends, the second, third, and they never break onto the scene. I think this is the year because the three that went the highest the most in the NFL draft with Kincaid, who's in Buffalo, who they're talking about playing him, playing basically like the 11 and a half personnel where Dalton Kincaid's playing the big slot role. You have Davis on the outside and obviously Diggs on the other side. And then Knox will come in and be the inline blocking tight end or outgoing route runner. So there's talks about that. Sam Laporta and Luke Musgrave and these other guys at tight end as rookies, like they're starting to really bust onto the scene and being stable guys that have been getting all the reps, all the slots, and all the formations they can handle and be like, all right, cool, like we're going to rock with this. So that's where these guys are going so late in your draft. So I'm willing to take someone in that tier I talked about with David Njoku, Patrick Freiermuth, I'm willing to take one of those guys. But also looking to grab one of those rookie tight ends later on to be like, okay, cool, I want to see what happens. So where it's like, all right, cool, I think if one of them can break out later on, I think especially Luke Musgrave was going super late in drafts. I really like that situation for the tight end if you miss out on Kelsey, Andrews, Waller's, the top 5, top 6 tight ends.
Okay. All right. And of course, I didn't want to pick a quarterback as somebody to be a steal. No, I didn't want to go there. But I did my last one. I wanted to go with a running back. And in my opinion, Kenneth Walker III is a guy that really people are not talking about. Quietly, he had 1,000-yard year last year, which nobody really talks about. I noticed that, and I'm like, y'all remember this guy kind of had he kind of had a good year last year. But, of course, health concerns are probably another thing that people think about. But you're in the Seattle offense that likes to run the football. Can throw the football, of course, with DK Metcalf, Jackson, Jason when he gets back healthy. And then you've got Lockett. But the bread and butter there with Pete Carroll has always been running the football. So, to me, he's a guy that you can get in later rounds that people are kind of not thinking about that could potentially, blossom and do great things for you offensively.
Yeah, I mean, so industry-wise, so let's rewind. So back in like April, when people were first putting out their rankings and stuff like that, whatever, Kenneth Walker was like going late second round. And obviously this was before the draft. Now after the draft, now with the whole, he got he injured his calf or leg or whatever during training camp, whatever. Now people are just pushing him down boards even more. I don't understand it. He's a guy I've been targeting constantly because with a guy like Kenneth Walker, who we know is, a running back that burst onto the scene later on in the year, last season. Obviously, Rashad Penny, we knew he couldn't stay healthy. So Kenneth Walker, came out, burst on the scenes, and, I think he averaged 14 points per game later on, for the rest of the last season. Now coming into this one where we're getting a significant discount, I think, like you talked about with the philosophy of Seattle, they do want to run the ball still. They will throw the ball a bit more now because now they got JSN, Jackson Smith-Njigba, most likely. First few games, they'll still be running the ball because I know he had wrist surgery. But ultimately, like you're right about Seattle, they do want to run the ball still. They're still a run-first team. And I think Walker is going to people are going to find out that Walker is a great RB2 that has a chance to be a top 10 RB, depending on where you take him. Now, 5th round, I'm so open to taking Walker there in particular. I've seen him go to the 6th round, which is just criminal. But in particular, like everything, I think that I always tell people grabbing Walker, so I've grabbed Walker and I've grabbed Charbonnet. So handcuff situation in general. So that way, all right, cool. If things go south with Walker or they decide that Charbonnet is just going to get a lot more usage and more touches and more snap share overall. So let's just say right now it's a comfortable 75-25 right now if they use Walker. That could creep up to a 60-40 split, 55-45 in the right scenario for Charbonnet. But that's why I tell people just to lock down and handcuff the situation. So grab Walker in the 5th and then grab Charbonnet in the 9th or 10th. So that way you can hold down the situation. So that way you're good to go no matter what.
Okay. All right. And really quickly, we're going to dive into the AFC South and talk about a wide receiver steal or a QB steal or maybe a running back potential steal in those divisions. We're going to start with the wide receivers, and to me, I think that a wide receiver still potentially there could be Tank Dell, the rookie from Houston. Yep. I mean, you can put him in the slot. He can do a few different things. He's not necessarily the tallest guy, but he definitely has jets and he definitely has chemistry with the quarterbacks there in Houston. I mean, do you have anybody you're thinking of?
Yeah, I would say like you're spot on with Tank Dell. There's a reason why he led the nation in receiving yards. But people are just doubting him because of how small he is, quote unquote. But I think in particular he has an opportunity to really break out for Houston later on in a team that starting Robert Woods, that's going to change later on in the year. They're going to find out, just like you and I know right now, that Robert Woods is definitely not the receiver he used to be, and he's definitely an old man. So, in particular, I would say Nico Collins on the same team because Nico Collins is going to be the number one receiver, and he's still going really late. You talk about Tank Dell going late and somewhat of a sleeper. Nico Collins is still on that cusp of being a sleeper. He's going like 12th round right now, which makes no sense. A guy that's 6'4", can run a 4.4. Like, oh yeah, that rhymed by the way. I think in particular, like it's kind of nonsense that he's going that late. I think people are also doubting CJ Stroud. I think CJ Stroud is a decent quarterback that he'll have his mistakes just like any rookie. But I think grabbing Nico Collins like as your fourth receiver, fifth receiver on your teams is something I definitely want to have because Houston's going to find themselves in situations where they got to pass the ball constantly. And I think Nico Collins is going to be a guy that benefits. I don't think Dalton Schultz is the tight end that people think he was, back when he was in Dallas. I just don't think they'll utilize him in that same regard, but we've been surprised before. But I do like Nico Collins like way later in your drafts and a great depth piece overall.
Okay. All right. Now, as far as the quarterback, I'm thinking about this one, and I've thought about this one, and a quarterback that nobody really, really takes is Ryan Tannehill. Okay. Nobody really, really takes him, but I'm just thinking about this scenario. You've got one-on-one matchups more than likely because people are going to stuff the box against Derrick Henry. You have a D-Hop on one side. You have a Treylon Burks on the other. You have a Chig Okonkwo, who's one of the more underrated tight ends in the NFL. So you've got weapons that can take advantage and actually take the top off defenses as well. And you just have mismatches, in my opinion. You have throw in there a Tyjae Spears too from Tulane as well. So to me, you could get him at a later round, and depending upon the matchups that they have, he can get you some points and get you some wins as well.
Yeah, I mean, with Tannehill, it's one of those things where Tannehill is more of a real-life better quarterback versus fantasy. I mean, Tannehill will always look to average. Like, if you're playing in what they call super flex leagues, so that's like leagues where you can start, 2 QBs. So, like, there's one spot where it's a super flex where you can start a QB along with any other flex. You can start Tannehill probably in those formats, especially on a bye week. But in particular, like, if you're talking about 1 QB leagues, talking about 10 team, 12 teams, 14 team, I wouldn't feel comfortable taking Tannehill as my QB1. I know people aren't talking about him, but it's for somewhat a good reason. With the Titans in particular, we don't exactly have a great feel for where this team will go. So the Titans remind me of the Rams right now. So the Rams in NFC and the Titans of the AFC, where we have some solid pieces to work with here when it comes to a team concept, but it's also we don't know where this is going to go. Just like with Stafford, the Rams, like Stafford probably for the second half, especially for your fantasy football leagues, like he could overall be a big bust, and they could end up starting guys like the kid they drafted out of was it Tulane, BYU, whichever one schools. I forgot. No, wait. Who's that guy that drafted? I can't remember off the top of my head. But overall, it's a scenario just like that with the Titans, where they drafted the second round quarterback, Will Levis. He could end up playing down the stretch because the Titans might just pull the plug and be like, all right, Tannehill, we're letting you go because we don't owe you any money next year anyway. So it's just one of those situations where you don't want to buy into the situation unless you absolutely have to. Tannehill is one of those guys where I don't feel you have to have on your teams unless it's a very big emergency where like both of your quarterbacks got hurt or something along those lines. And Tannehill could then kind of slot in and give you like, I would say on average, go like 20 for 30, like 250 yards passing, 2 touchdowns, maybe he rushes one in and gives you a solid 18 points per game. But Tannehill's not a guy I'm definitely not targeting because of that. If we're in super deep leagues, like I know people that play 30-team leagues. I'm like, how do you guys do that? I don't know how you do that. The guy I want to hype up that I know people are somewhat still weary on is Anthony Richardson. I think with AR, it's one of those things where people are going to always be hesitant about rookie QBs because we're baking in how these rookies are going to be, right? They're going to be turnover prone like crazy. They're going to make mistakes, this, that, and the third. But with Anthony Richardson, when Shane Steichen came in, I knew all along that Anthony Richardson was going to be a Colt. As long as no funny business happened. Because that's a perfect scenario for him. And I think they'll use everything they saw from Hurts and apply it to the Anthony Richardson situation. They love him as far as from a personality standpoint, as far as an attitude perspective. That factors in. And then with his rushing ability, we're talking about Mike Vick type of, prototype. Not as fast, but overall just like the way that he can use his legs. So with Anthony Richardson, in my mind, he's someone that I definitely would like. And I can steal away from some other people because some people have him maybe as a QB9 or QB10 overall, and then there's some people that have him like QB13, QB14. Like he's not going to do anything. He's got to turn over the ball like crazy. I'll give you this: since 2000, there has been 33 QBs that have rushed. I've had 100+ rush attempts, which I assume Richardson is going to do by like week 9. Since then, the top 29 of those 33 QBs have reached top 10 numbers per game that season. Though there are no seasons. So we're talking about a guy that I've said this to people already about anything Anthony Richardson related. Mm-hmm. You grab Anthony Richardson and you pair him up with a QB that you feel is a somewhat safer QB, a Jared Goff. Who else? Aaron Rodgers. Some of these guys that
Patrick Mahomes, you got those guys too.
Well, but
that's exceptional. But
it's a bit much. But for the strategy purposes, so people go and let's just say people are going through their draft, they're grabbing running back, receiver, tight ends, and they just I forgot about the QB. Oh my god. They go and grab Anthony Richardson, maybe like 9th round, 10th round. Then you pair him up with a guy that you think could still be a really good starter the next round. So Daniel Jones, Aaron Rodgers, Jared Goff, Russell Wilson, Derek Carr a round or two later. And you pair up that situation. So it's more of if something were to happen with Anthony Richardson where he's not doing what he needs to or whatever, or I have to start him in a good matchup week and he doesn't come up well for me, then I can just grab and start my other quarterback, especially Daniel Jones. I like pairing Daniel Jones and A-Rich together because they have similar skill sets, but Daniel Jones in particular, we've seen him burst onto the scene out of nowhere, and most people don't want him anyway.
You're right. Well, we're gonna kind of go ahead to the show. We're gonna actually go to the game portion of the show. Since you have dropped all your fantasy knowledge, I want to thank you for coming on the show. Absolutely. But we can't end the show without a game. 5 questions, 2 answers, 1 choice. Are you ready?
Let's do it.
All right. We're gonna go with Kendrick Lamar. We got 2 songs. Don't Kill My Vibe or All Right. You got to pick one of those songs. Which one are you picking?
Don't Kill My Vibe.
Okay. All right. We're going to go fantasy QB or fantasy skill position players. Which one is more important to you in fantasy football?
QB position.
QB. Okay. All right. We're going Good Kid, Mad City or Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers. which album are you listening to?
Mad City.
First?
Mad City.
Mad City.
Mad City.
Man, I'll go with Mr. Morale, man.
I hear you.
love that album.
I hear you.
I love that album. Now, okay. Fantasy trades or fantasy waiver wire? Which one do you think is more important?
Fantasy waiver wire, because with trades in your leagues, like, it's really hit and miss. Everyone values people differently, and then people are worried about getting got and stuff like that. So waiver wire it is.
Okay. Got you. And of course, I had to give you a Jets question.
Of course you did.
Mr. Jet is, in your opinion, at wide receiver, Wayne Corbett or Keyshawn Johnson?
It's tough. I would say Wayne Corbett, because Keyshawn Johnson ended up winning a Super Bowl with the Bucs. So it's like, I can't hate on him, but it's more like, what the heck were we doing? So, yeah, it's Wayne Corbett for me.
All right. That's 5 questions, 2 answers, and 1 choice. Thank you for coming on the show, Nick. If you can, tell everyone where they can find you, where they can find your expertise as well, and just where they can find you on social media.
Sure. So, what they used to call Twitter is now X. So feel free to follow me. Feel free to follow me on there at Nick_Wilcox25. Every Wednesday we have the TBQ Sports Pod, so I like to drop my knowledge there throughout the year. Feel free to follow us on YouTube at TBQ Sports. So feel free to. Those channels are the best. Send me a DM with any questions you got. Feel free to follow me on Facebook. Add me a friend on Facebook as well. Wherever I can answer questions. If you have questions or Mike ever wants to bring me on again, feel free to do so. I'm here for it, and we can get it popping like that too. So I want to thank you for letting me be a part of this, especially episode 200, the big one. I appreciate it overall. I'm very grateful and blessed.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Well, of course, you're going to come back on, man. You dropped a lot of knowledge, and I'm pretty sure a lot of people appreciated it as well. And I just want to thank everyone for, of course, tuning in to this episode of Touring the AFC South. Of course, you can find me on Twitter, or X as they want to call it, at Mike Patton 82. That's MikePatton 82. You can also find me on Instagram and Threads at that's THA, not THE, _general_MP. And of course, you can find Touring the AFC South on Google Plus, because Google Podcasts. There we go. I went way back there. You got Apple Podcasts, you got Google Podcasts, you got Spotify, you got Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, you name it. We are there. Actually on YouTube. Hello, everyone, as well. Just want to thank everyone for tuning in to Touring the AFC South. Go ahead and follow it. Send it out to your friends. They want this knowledge. They want to listen to this show. Thank you all again for tuning in to Touring the AFC South. We're out. Peace.